Well, before we get started, I suppose the first thing we need to really do is know exactly what PMP is. So maybe what we'll do is take a little survey amongst teachers and see what they know. Do they know what PMP actually stands for? What does PMP stand for?
Professional PMP program. No.
Maybe purchasing money parity?
I know what this is. It's the professional merit. No.
Premeditated pontificating?
Pay merit professional. What is the acronym?
Principally majestic porcupine.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? I was eating my sandwich.
Well, I think Scott was about to get it, but PMP is Performance Management Program. Suppose we need to discuss what it is. Well, PMP, this program, is the process, the annual process, by which employees at KAUST, in this case teachers, are evaluated and improve. And that process is the one that will now lead to the annual increase for the employee, in this case, the teacher. So I think the best thing for us to do is to look at a sample teacher, a case study, if you will. So I present to you our sample teacher. This young man, handsome, dashing, is going to serve as our sample teacher today, and I think we'll protect his identity by calling him John. Well, maybe Johnny. Now, the first thing Johnny must know is that he's going to be assessed on 4 domains. The first one, teaching and learning. Then professional responsibilities. The third one, his contributions to the school outside of the classroom. And lastly, his goals. Those 4 domains are then placed in a rubric across the top. Then we have the top row is distinguished, the middle row proficient, and the bottom is does not meet expectations. Now, each of those cells is then filled with what will become indicators, performance indicators, to determine if the teacher is distinguished or proficient or not meeting proficient standards in each of those areas. Now, for Johnny, we're going to have to put in some fictitious indicators just for this simulation. And this is what we're going to be looking at for him. If Johnny can stay awake in meetings, he'll be distinguished. If he sleeps, well, proficient. His contributions to the school, for example. If he bakes, he'll be distinguished. To Mimi, proficient. And if he kind of accomplishes his goals, he'll be proficient. I remind you, those were fictitious indicators. Let's look at what Johnny's going to have to do over the course of the year. Well, at the beginning of the school year, he's going to have to do a self-evaluation, like we've done, and he's going to set some goals. Let's take a look at Johnny in action as he sets his 2 goals. He's going to tackle his professional goal first, and he's got a good one in mind. That's good work, Johnny. Well, what's next? Well, now comes the rest of the school year. During that time, he will collect evidence to support those 4 domains that we saw in the beginning, including his goal. That evidence can include a wide variety of things. Walk-through observations by a variety of people, student work samples, feedback, anything like this. Now, once he's got his samples, he'll go through and choose the ones that are going to be included for his PMP assessment, if you will. But he won't be doing this completely alone. Throughout the whole process, he'll have the support of a PMP facilitator, helping him throughout the whole year, including at the end. In this case, to choose which samples to submit. Once he has his evidence collected, he'll go back to the 4-domain rubric and reevaluate himself, choosing proficient or distinguished. In this case, for a cool nickname,
Johnny Drama.
He's going to be distinguished. He'll complete his evaluation and move on to the next step, which is presenting his evaluation and evidence to a team, a select team of colleagues, admin, team leaders, etc. And so there he goes, with his self-evaluation, his evidence in his back pocket, and he's ready to go to share this with the team. Well, almost ready. Well, the team that's going to receive him is going to be eager to see his evaluation and his evidence. And that team could consist of team leaders, colleagues, admin, or professional athletes, or Tarek's wooden dolls. Either way, Johnny will present to them all of his evidence, showing where he's distinguished, where he's proficient, what his goals were, how well he did in achieving those goals. And in general, he will summarize his evaluation and that criteria where he feels he's distinguished and proficient. The team will then look at the evidence and his evaluation and agree with him or comment on those 4 disciplines based on the evidence that was provided. As we can see here, Johnny Drama is actually an amazing teacher as he is distinguished in 2 areas. Very difficult to achieve. Well, since we're on the topic of achieving distinguished levels in the criteria, let's hear Maddie's thoughts on distinguished work.
Newslinks, the International School newspaper, and over here the International Educator. These are full of ads for great teachers, including right here, the Kaus School, helping us to create a beacon of education in Saudi Arabia. Now you might see that number 2 on our checklist is craft a collegial professional culture focused on student learning. That's always been a cornerstone of what we're doing. And to finish our to-do list, we're carefully selecting a few more gifted educators. You might remember the day that you interviewed for your job at the Kaus School. You were that gifted educator that we were looking for. And when we go recruiting, we look for the top 2 to 10% on every sending schools form. We look to see, do we have the top educators here? What we're certain of is we have gifted educators. And in that, we think we've already hired people that are proficient to distinguished. Every single one of us is proficient and in some cases distinguished in areas. What we're trying to do is create an opportunity to grow our abilities to be distinguished in all areas. And all of us give it our all every day to do that. And that's what our PMP performance system is aiming to do and to reward.
Thank you, Maddie. In fact, she's not the only one that feels that our teachers are proficient in many areas and distinguished in some.
I think that Sharon Harris is distinguished in her contributions to the Kaus School.
In my opinion, a staff member that is exemplary in teaching and learning is Princess Judith Potter.
I would select Rodrigo Talas for a colleague who takes his professional responsibilities to heart.
Well, let's go back to Johnny Drama here, distinguished Johnny Drama, and let's see how all of this situation is going to impact him. So we turn to the 4-domain rubric, and we assign to each of those cells a numerical value, ranging from 10 to 0, as you can see. The most emphasis is placed on teaching and learning, where distinguished is a 10 in that area, 4 in proficient, and you can see the rest of the values assigned to each of those cells. Now, in this case, Johnny Drama has achieved a 4, a 4, a 4, and a 1, 2 distinguished categories, a very, very good evaluation. It all adds up to 13, being his final total score. What does this mean for Johnny Drama? Well, that 13 is applied to another table, which contains the raw score in one column, and then the percent return that he's going to get for that year based on what he scored. Johnny scored a 13, which is in the 12 to 16 band, which is a very good band to be in, and that will determine his percent. But what percent will that be? Well, that requires a small explanation. Turns out those percentages are determined by the Kaus board annually, every year based on global trends and incentives in all sectors, including education. It's not an exact figure. What we can tell you is that that band in the 12 to the 16 would be in the 4 to 5 range. Throughout Kaus, that's been the average that has been. What that means for you is that if you continue being that proficient to distinguished teacher that we know you are, you will fall at least in this band, with the potential for even more. Through this PMP system, which aims to be fair, consistent, and reliable in all ways, and and wants to reward you for the great work that you're doing and help you improve in the areas that you want to improve in. Now, it's easy to keep an eye on this final table with the raw scores and the percentages, but we must point out that that is not the main feature of this program. Neither are my art skills, by the way. But the main feature is, as we all know, getting back to what it is that we do, which is teaching and learning. We want to become better teachers so that our students can become better learners. This program is designed to help you do that and reward you for what it is that you do. So we ask you to keep your eye on the goal of value. We ask you to trust in the system as it develops, and we ask for your input and your help.
All right. So PMP, a framework for continuous improvement. That's basically what it is. As Daniel pointed out at the very end of that video, for us, all the way through this process of developing this, it has been about how do we make sure we maintain that notion of continuous improvement. That's what we've been looking at. That's been our mindset, it's been our frame for the whole way through. Your task today is this. It's very hard to see, but basically the little picture that was drawn in the video with the 4 domains is it here. It's in front of you. It's got numbers on it at the moment. I'll come back to those. But essentially, it's empty at the moment. But I just want to give you some understanding of one, why it's empty, and what it is, so that as you go through today's activity, you understand. The first 2 columns, learning and teaching and professional responsibilities, already exist. It's our PIT now. It's the Danielson criteria. From the outset, though, we always maintained that we wanted to simplify, condense, and make it far more manageable, because as you all know, it's quite a drawn-out system as it stands. So we're really trying to condense it down, hence the little wee survey that you've been doing numerous times this week. So the first 2 columns already exist. We just need to do some work, wordsmithing, condensing, trying to find likenesses, and we'll get into that shortly. This column here is the relatively new, not the notion of contribution, but the way that it becomes part of the evaluation process. We don't have any criteria for that at the moment. And then the 4th column is goal development. And that is to say, you've set goals. Currently you're setting 3. As of next year, you'll only set 2. But there's no real check-in against those goals to say, how did you actually go? You just set goals, and at the end of the year, we all go on holiday and you come back and set new ones. So they are going to become a living part of your time here at CAL. Your task today, as a collective, will be to start work on the indicators that go in these 3 columns. Don't worry about the goal one today. There's a task that we've established for you, which we'll get into shortly, to do that work. But in order to do that work effectively, you need to understand some of the principles behind this whole rubric. It's like any rubric, it's weighted. We did a whole bunch of work with HR, both with Mahmoud and also with James. And James is sort of learning development. Mahmoud deals a lot with metrics within KAUST itself. Metrics being, how do you turn that into pay, basically. To do that exercise, we needed to understand the logic and the thinking behind all of that, and then what does that mean for us? So, if we look today again, only at these 3 columns here, you need to consider a few things. The first thing, that top left box is worth 10 points, hence the number 10 in the box. Relatively speaking, this box is worth 60% of this box, hence the 6. Right? Because distinguished is saying you're a 10 out of 10, congratulations. Proficient is saying you're sort of a 6 out of 10, effectively. So when you start writing indicators and you start thinking, what is it that's important in learning and teaching? That first box has to clearly be more difficult, more challenging, more important than this box. Pretty straightforward. Like any rubric, if you wrote has to have exceptional handwriting when using a whiteboard, has to have legible handwriting when using a whiteboard, you have the same indicator, just at a lower level. So it's a standard rubric, nothing fancy about it. But the weightings of each box are important as you start writing these indicators. You have to keep in mind the relative worth of each box. This box here, which is dealing with professional responsibilities, is worth 40% of the learning and teaching box. If that makes sense. Now, if you look as a whole, and this is very important, this column here is worth 50% of the entire evaluation. So that column, the learning and teaching column, is worth half the entire evaluation. The other half is made up of these parts. And again, you can see the metrics coming to life almost. As you look here, it's 10. It's the same as 4 plus 4 plus 2 equals 10. So 50%, 50%. Now, the reason those numbers are what they are, partly is that relativity, but it's also this piece here. In the video, there was a chart that Daniel had drawn that said 17 to 20, 12 to 16, and so on. And this is the rationale behind each of those scores. Again, important as you start writing these indicators to consider these points. Firstly, a score of 17 or greater requires distinguished in learning and teaching. You cannot score 17 unless you are evaluated at distinguished for learning and teaching. Because at the end of the day, that's what school exists for, learning. Lots of other cool things, very important. Hence, in here, if you get, to get a minimum score of 12, you must achieve distinguished in at least one other domain. So, for example, you might be proficient in learning and teaching, proficient in professional responsibilities, and in your goal development, but distinguished in your contribution. There's your chance to bring yourself into that middle band. Alright, so those bands are deliberate. The 10-11 is to say that you got proficient in everything, but there may be one indicator that drops you out of proficient. Now, it's important perhaps also to realise the way that you move between the boxes. To be distinguished, it's all or nothing. So if you are 3 out of 4, then you're proficient. To be classified, if you like, as distinguished in that domain, you have to have all 4. As soon as one's missing, it brings you back down to here. So, same thing for proficient. If out of all the proficient indicators you have 3 out of the 4, that drops down into where we start things like action plans. We have to be honest with ourselves. That's a concern. If you're not proficient at learning and teaching, we need to do some work. Same thing for the other domains. If you drop down below, we need to work on that as well. So, then that basically takes you down into the -9 territory when you get into those things. So going back to the beginning, today's exercise will be filling in those blanks. Think about those numbers as you're writing your indicators. Does the relativity reflect the scores in each of those boxes? That's the really important part as you start writing these indicators. Alright?
Great question. So for the assessment part, how is the admin team going to make sure they're sitting with every teacher? Is that daunting? Nod your head now. Nod your head. So that's a great question. So that's part of the how, Mohammed, and that's the next phase we're working through, is now that after we get your feedback, the team will come back. We'll be looking to finalize that framework with the high-end indicators. And then the other part of the job is to say, what does implementation look like, both once we begin and in every way, in every fashion? What are the learning partners going to do? What kind of trainings do we need? What kind of orientation do we need? What is going to happen to make sure that we are fair, reliable, consistent. All those hows is the next stage, and we've certainly been talking about those things all along the way, but we will need to come back with you and share and be ready to go at the beginning of next year, so we need to come back and share with you by the end of this year. Here's more information on the hows. How is it going to get done? Great question.
No, I was just going to say one of the questions I got asked is that there are other versions of the PIP for specialist positions, like coordinators, librarian, counselors, those of you know, so that this still has to be done for those positions as well.
Yeah, so for the standards that we have that are professional but maybe not teaching, also the bespoke system will work in that way too, standards-based.
Could get distinguished, or only a certain percentage is possible out of everyone?
Metrics people?
It's not a
it's not a quota system, so could everyone get distinguished? Just like we say, could every child that we teach get distinguished? Do we work every day to get, we have hired people, how I would characterize it, and what they've said in the CAUS nomenclature is a 5 walks on water. So that's the language they've used to characterize the idea of distinguished. It's very aspirational. Most of us in the room would say, I just aspire to be distinguished in every single thing I do. So could we all be distinguished in everything we do? Sure we could. Are we all? Do we think everyone in this room is going to get a distinguished on absolutely everything?
Yeah.
That's the question. So to get the top level, do you have to be distinguished in everything?
No.
You have to be distinguished as a teacher. 3 of the 4 you have to be distinguished in.
But even if you do this,
into that distinguished, into that 17 plus bracket, if you look at the numbers on that chart, it's pretty massive. Basically, you have to be distinguished in learning and teaching. You cannot get 17 without it. And then you have to have at least 1 other, possibly 2 if it's only in gold development.
So in the question about highly select too, we've been highly selected teachers. There are highly select IB World schools. 2% of the kids earn 7s. They're in highly selective schools. It's very, very, very hard to earn criteria-based to earn 7s. Very, very, very hard. So if you look at the numbers, so is it possible? Of course. Does every teacher work every day to get the kids up? Sure. Do they already have a select, distinguished group of children? Yes. How many score 45? Our criteria for excellence is really high. And we all want to be striving for it every day.
How will we demonstrate? I mean, are we going to be building our own portfolios, or how do we demonstrate?
So those are great questions. Learning files, portfolios, artifacts, those are great questions, and that's the high, Jonah. So I would say, and we're still very open to your feedback and ideas. We've had great ideas from people, and our site-based team was amazing to meet with us. So if you have ideas like that, this is what I think could be good and easy and work and cascade so that we're not all scrambling. Give us your ideas. We've talked at length about these kinds of things, but that's our next phase, is really to say, what will it look like for the person? How will I do it? So we welcome your ideas. Again, they're stickies if you want to leave them today. Or you can send any member of the team at any time feedback that you think would work. And we'll probably also try to meet with our site-based group as well. Okay, so I think I shared where we're moving to. The group will be continuing to meet to look at your questions, to collect what we've learned from today, to take all the feedback, and to see what we can glean, to build, to do the build. So we think there will be quite a bit of resonance or affinity in what we find, and we'll see and tool away on it, and we'll have something to come back and present to you in May. About the final form, as well as we hope to come back and present to you the hows. how is this going to occur, and to answer your questions about that for next year. Thanks so much for a day of hard work, everyone. Really appreciate it.